Hi, my name's Yurib. I work with Inside the Outdoors, and we're here to talk about some of the areas that we have surrounding us and learn about the terms that scientists use to describe these areas. So one of the first things we're going to talk about is the scientific method. Now the scientific method, this is a great way to remember the scientific method. So this acronym that we use is called OHEC. And these are the steps that scientists use whenever they're studying certain areas, like the hillsides and the pond and the trees around me. So as we go through the steps, one of the first things that scientists do is they make observations. Now when you observe things around you, you want to make sure and use your five senses. So you can look at things, you can smell things, you can taste things, touch things, and you definitely want to make sure and listen. So as we observe the areas around us, first, some of the things that we see are things that are alive and also things that are non-living. So when these two factors interact in an area, they have a specific name. Now, as scientists, we want to make sure and use the scientific terms. So, living, or biotic. So, biotic are all the living things around us. And a good way to remember that is by the first three letters, bio. So, biology is the study of life. So, biotic things can be things like the plants, you have some of the animals, you have the grasses on the ground. So, the biotic factors are interacting with the abiotic factors, which are the non-living things. So, you have the trees and the plants interacting with the water, which is non-living, interacting with the sunlight, interacting with the land, and also the air. And when you have those two things interacting, and I always like to use hand signs, you have our biotic factors and our abiotic factors, you bring them together, and that is what's known as an ecosystem. So what is an ecosystem? So an ecosystem is all biotic and abiotic things that interact in a particular area. So an example of the most dominant ecosystem that we have in the Santa Ana Mountains, which are local Orange County mountains, is known as the Chaparral. So the Chaparral ecosystem is an ecosystem that has short, thick shrubs which are adapted to live in areas of very little water. So as you can see, remember we're observing as scientists, the plants up there, they look really short, really dry. And that's because you don't get a lot of rain in this type of ecosystem. So one of the key words in that definition was adapted. So the plants, in order to survive in that hot ecosystem, need to make sure and have certain adaptations. So what is an adaptation? An adaptation is a behavior or characteristic that helps a plant or animal survive in their environment. So an example would be the plants up in the Chaparral can survive with very little water by storing as much as they can. Another example would be something maybe in a different ecosystem. So as you can see, besides the Chaparral ecosystem on the top of the mountains and all the hills around us, we also have some water down here. And that is a different ecosystem that is known as a wetland. Now, what is a wetland ecosystem? An area of land where the water level remains near or above the surface of the ground for most of the year. So as you can see, that is a small version of a wetland, which we do have wetlands all throughout Southern California, which means that water will always be there, but the level will change depending on the time of the year and the amount of precipitation, the amount of rain that we're getting. So it can get very low, it can get pretty high, but it's going to be a wetland. And the plants also have adaptations that help them survive. So the pond down there has plants that are adapted to live inside of the water. A good indicator of a wetland ecosystem, you have plants that are sticking straight up that are known as cattails. So the flower actually looks like a corn dog or a cat's tail that's going straight up in the air. So that is ecosystem number 2. But we have our third ecosystem. It is known as the riparian. The riparian ecosystem will be in that direction. So riparian is an ecosystem that is located along a stream or a river. So if it does rain in the area, the runoff, the water coming off the hillside, will collect at the bottom. And then you have streams that start to form. Those streams, that water is accumulating, and the plants will use that water, and with more water, the plants can grow a lot bigger. So you have trees like sycamore trees and oak trees that love the riparian. You have a lot of shade in the riparian as well. So let's review the 3 ecosystems that we've talked about. So remember, an ecosystem is where biotic, living things like the grasses, the trees, the plants all around us interact with abiotic factors, the non-living things, which can be the land, it can be the water, the sunlight is key, and also the air. When they interact, that's what makes an ecosystem. And the 3 ecosystems we have in this area, in Orange County, examples would be the Chaparral, which is the most dominant out here. We also have a wetland ecosystem, okay? And we also have the Riparian, which is very shady, a lot of tall trees throughout the trails. And don't forget, as a scientist, the scientific method is important. So we made lots of observations when talking about the ecosystems. A hypothesis. This is a key word for scientists whenever they have questions on certain things. So a hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? Now, a hypothesis has to be something that you are able to test. So if a scientist came out here and had a question about the plants in the chaparral, their question might be, how does a plant up there survive with very little water? A hypothesis is a guess that could be tested by experimentation about what will happen based on what you know, observe, and experience. So after they pose that question, the scientists might make that hypothesis. Well, we think that some plants in the chaparral have waxy coating on the leaves, which allow the plant to trap water inside. So therefore, they're not losing too much water as they're sweating that water out. So that would be their hypothesis. Now, in order for them to make that hypothesis, they would have to also do an experiment. So there are many different experiments you can do to find out how the plants can absorb that water. When you get the results of the experiments, that's when you talk about the conclusion. Okay, so you talk about the results. And then once you go through the results, you walk away with that knowledge. So the layer of waxing, okay, is trapping the water inside. So that's an experiment that you can do on your own, and you come up with the conclusion talking about the data, and you walk away with the knowledge. Again, that is an adaptation that helps the plant survive in this area. So again, we have the chaparral ecosystem, short plants. A way to remember that is chapstick. Use it when it's very hot and dry. Cowboys wear chaps. They used to ride out throughout these hills. They would wear the chaps because they didn't want the plants scratching their legs. You have the riparian. I always like to say riparian rhymes with librarian, and it's located along a river. Begins with the same letter, riparian, a river. So you have the tall plants, a lot of shade in that area. And you have our wetland, which, remember, is always going to have water and has those cattails usually growing from inside that water. So hopefully you'll get a chance to study these areas on your own, and good luck in the Science Olympiad.